There's this totally pristine image we have of building something, right? Like you picture an architectural blueprint.
Oh yeah, perfectly clean lines.
Right, exactly. The lines are sharp, the measurements are exact, and it all just makes perfect logical sense on paper. But then you actually step out onto the construction site, and while it's pouring rain, you're knee-deep in mud.
The materials you ordered are like 3 weeks late.
Yes. And that beautiful, perfect blueprint feels basically useless in that moment.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of chaos.
Mm.
And yet that muddy, totally unpredictable site is really the only place where anything real actually gets built.
And that tension, right? Like that tension between the neat theories we're taught and the messy reality of actually making things happen. That's the core of what we're unpacking for you today. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today we're exploring the philosophy of build, don't talk.
Yeah, it's all centered around the insights, the lived experiences, and honestly, the somewhat controversial frameworks of entrepreneur and content creator Raj Shamani.
And we've got a seriously rich stack of sources for this one.
We really do. We're pulling directly from excerpts of his ghost-written book, which is also titled Build, Don't Talk, but we're making sure to balance that out with a pretty highly critical book review by Abhijit Kumar.
Right, getting both sides.
Exactly. Plus, we got news coverage of Shamani's recent viral defense of Generation Z at the World Government Summit and just a bunch of transcripts from his various podcasts and video appearances over the years.
So our mission today is really to cut straight through all that generic motivational fluff that just floods social media. We want to extract the actual street-smart, highly practical frameworks for, learning, starting a business, and creating a brand.
Yeah, equipping you with the tools to just stop overthinking and start executing, giving you that thorough knowledge without the overwhelming info overload.
And to really understand the foundation of Shamani's philosophy, I think we have to start with that World Government Summit in Dubai, right? Because he really waded into this massive global debate.
He did. He was up there defending Gen Z against this relentless label of being a lazy generation.
And just to be super clear up front, our goal here isn't to definitively declare whether Gen Z is or isn't lazy.
Right. No. We are looking at Shamani's argument because it acts as this perfect diagnosis for his core critique of our traditional systems. He basically argued on that global stage that young professionals aren't avoiding hard work at all.
Right, they're avoiding what he calls fake work.
Exactly, fake work. They are completely refusing to participate in blind obedience when there's just no meaningful purpose attached to the task. Like, they demand flexibility, transparency, and actual ownership, rather than just chasing mere corporate status.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that rejection of the old corporate ladder ties directly into his broader critique of the traditional 10+2 education system.
Oh, heavily. Shamani argues that schools essentially treat human beings like simple printers.
Simple printers.
Yeah, think about it. You cram data into the machine, and you expect it to output perfectly onto a standardized test paper.
Right, no deviation allowed.
Exactly. But that mechanism completely ignores the two greatest human assets for building an actual business, which are imagination and emotion.
I mean, a simple printer is a pretty bleak way to look at standardized testing, but it captures the limitation perfectly. Like, schools are hyper-focused on what to learn, but they leave this massive void when it comes to how to apply it.
Yeah, they almost entirely ignore kinesthetic application.
Which is learning by physically doing.
Right, which is how the real world actually functions. It's like trying to train for a marathon by only reading textbooks about running without ever actually putting on a pair of shoes.
That is a great analogy, and he offers this pretty radical alternative to fix it, right?
He does. In his ideal educational system, you wouldn't have students doing these one-off dioramas for an annual science fair.
Yeah.
He views those as like static museum exhibits that just don't reflect reality.
Right.
Instead, he suggests an experiential system where kids actually run 10-minute daily businesses during their school breaks.
10 minutes every day.
Every single day. And through that daily iteration, they would learn real-time supply and demand, human behavioral psychology, and how to identify good debt versus bad debt, like in real time.
He also points out this stark cultural contrast here, comparing the educational environments in Israel and India.
Yeah, he praises Israel for nurturing this culture where kids are actively rewarded for asking what might be considered stupid questions. Like, curiosity is the actual currency there.
Whereas he argues the Indian system often silences those questions.
Right, demanding conformity over inquiry.
But wait, let me push back a little here. If we completely abandon the simple printer model, don't we lose the foundational baseline? I mean, doesn't a student need some level of rote learning, like understanding basic math? or mastering grammar before they can start innovating and questioning the fundamental nature of the universe?
I mean, foundational knowledge is undeniably necessary. Shamani's point isn't that basic math or grammar are useless, not at all. His point is that without the application piece, that foundation just rots. Like, think about the difference between memorizing the formula for calculating volume for a geometry test.
Right, just to pass the exams.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Versus having to calculate the exact volume of a physical product you are trying to package and ship for a profit during your 10-minute school break. The physical pressure and the actual application are what cement that baseline knowledge into a usable skill.
So the theory doesn't stick until it hits the mud of the construction site.
Exactly.
But if the education system is fundamentally failing to teach us how to apply these concepts, how do we find our actual path forward? If nobody's teaching you how to build, you kind of have to build your own curriculum.
And that requires a massive shift toward radical personal accountability. And according to Shamani, that starts with just brutal self-awareness.
Which his own origin story is a prime example of.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
He grew up in a household where all his cousins were routinely scoring like 95% on their exams.
And he was not.
No, he was scoring 43%. He was literally branded the useless kid of the extended family.
I mean, that kind of label could easily crush someone. But he uses this concept he calls the buffet of life, which I love.
Yeah, it's a great visual.
He argues that life is not an a la carte menu. You don't just sit at a table and wait for a waiter to magically bring you your ideal career or your ultimate passion.
Right, nobody's serving it to you.
You have to physically get up, walk around, smell the different options, and taste dishes you might actually hate just to figure out what you are genuinely good at.
And he certainly forced himself to sample that buffet. Like, he tried rapping to learn English by mimicking Linkin Park.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but realized pretty quickly he had zero musical talent. He tried learning the guitar purely for the social cachet, but abandoned it because his fingers hurt.
Fair enough.
He even tried DJing, only to realize he didn't care about track selection or mixing at all. He literally just liked holding a microphone and yelling, "Everybody jump."
That's hilarious. Didn't he try stock trading too?
Yeah, high school stock trading. And he very quickly lost his money.
The ultimate catalyst for him, though, and here is where it gets really interesting, was this totally humiliating incident around what became the Dubai meme.
Oh man, this story is brutal.
It is. He wanted social validation so desperately that he lied to his entire class, claiming he was traveling to Dubai.
Right, just to sound cool.
Exactly. And when the lie unraveled, the backlash was merciless. He became a walking joke. Like, classmates were literally posting on social media like, "For Raj, comment for Dubai."
That is peak high school cruelty. But that public humiliation actually stripped away any delusion he had about his own status. It fueled this aggressive drive to achieve something undeniable so he wouldn't just be a punchline anymore.
Right.
The core lesson he extracted from that gauntlet of failures is pretty stark. You basically have to admit you suck.
Admitting you suck is incredibly painful. But it functions a lot like finally looking at the GPS and admitting you're lost. It's the only way the map can actually start routing you to your true destination.
That's spot on. As long as his ego was telling him he was a genius who belonged in Dubai, he was starting from the wrong coordinates entirely. Admitting he was a 43% student gave him his true starting point.
And until you admit your deficits, your ego is actively preventing your growth. He even practices this in the very book we are referencing today.
He does, right in the beginning.
Yeah, in the first few pages, Shamani openly admits that he sucks at writing. He states plainly that he hired a ghostwriter for the project.
Which is so rare for a business book author to admit.
So rare. But his goal was just to transmit his frameworks to the reader, and he didn't care whose fingers physically typed the words. He absolutely refused to let his lack of writing skill bottleneck his execution.
So finding your true coordinates is step one. But step two is where most people freeze. Like, how do you actually start building a business without getting totally paralyzed by the pressure to invent the next iPhone?
Right, the pressure to be a unique genius.
Exactly. And his advice here is incredibly provocative. He says, stop innovating and start copying.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive in a culture that is just obsessed with disruption.
It does, but he backs it up with historical market realities.
Yeah.
He points out that, Ola copied Uber, Flipkart copied Amazon. His framework suggests you shouldn't waste years overthinking and trying to invent a product the world has never seen before.
You copy a proven market model, and you simply out-execute the competition.
Exactly. And he executed this exact philosophy at age 16. He read an article summarizing Andrew Carnegie's advice for generating wealth, which is basically start a business, build a network, and get into the FMCG fast-moving consumer goods sector.
So he just followed the blueprint.
He really did. He spent hours standing in local grocery stores just observing consumer behavior.
And that ground-level observation revealed a very specific market shift. He noticed that liquids were steadily replacing solid soaps, and that local shopkeepers and housewives were the ultimate decision-makers dictating those purchases.
Right, yeah, they had the buying power.
So, armed with that validation, he decided to create a dishwashing gel.
But wait, let me ask you the obvious question here. If everyone follows that advice and just copies the big players, don't we just end up with a completely flooded market of cheap, useless knockoffs? Like, where is the actual value creation if you were just cloning someone else's soap?
That is the crucial distinction in his framework. Copying doesn't mean producing a counterfeit or a subpar knockoff. You are copying the validation.
Oh, no.
The market has already proven with their wallets that they want dishwashing soap. You don't need to reinvent the concept of cleaning dishes. The true value and the competitive advantage is built entirely in the execution and the delivery.
So how did he execute it differently?
Well, Shamani didn't just make generic soap. He engineered it with the aroma of sweet lime and fruit pulp so it would smell appealing to kids in the house.
Smart.
And more importantly, he priced it aggressively at 45 rupees for 500 milliliters, drastically undercutting the major competitors who were charging around 110 rupees.
Wow, that's a massive price difference. And the hustle to get that product safe for the market is like a masterclass in utilizing whatever leverage you have. I mean, he started with just 10,000 rupees in capital.
Practically nothing.
Yeah, and he had no idea if his homemade chemical formula would literally burn people's skin off.
Which is a pretty big liability.
Seriously. So he utilized what he calls the ultimate student power, which is begging. He tracked down a professional chemical engineer and begged him to review the formula, paying him 2,000 rupees out of his tiny budget just to ensure the products wouldn't harm anyone.
That perfectly illustrates his philosophy of momentum over pride. He used the only resource he had in abundance, the willingness to ask for help and look completely foolish doing it.
But even the most perfectly executed, safe, sweet lime dish soap will just sit rotting in cardboard boxes if you can't convince a shopkeeper to stock it.
Right. Having the physical product is only half the battle. The real hurdle is human psychology.
Exactly. This requires mastering the art of selling and negotiating. And Shamani highlights a massive psychological shift in the modern marketplace here.
We are definitely no longer in the era of information disparity.
Right. It used to be that the salesman held all the specifications and the buyer knew nothing. Today, we live in an era of information overload. A buyer can pull out their phone and Google your product, your competitors, and your global reviews in 10 seconds.
So because you can no longer compete purely on hoarding information, the only currencies left that actually close a sale are trust and caring.
To systematize that psychology, he uses what he calls the P plus E plus U formula.
Preparation, emotion, and urgency.
Yes, so preparation is straightforward, just knowing your industry deeply. But the emotion component is fascinating. He argues that in both B2B and B2C contexts, humans fundamentally only buy for two reasons.
Fear or aspiration.
Exactly. You are either terrified of falling behind, like buying a new software tool so your company doesn't lose market share to AI, or you aspire to a higher social or operational lifestyle.
And the U urgency is really the linchpin of the whole thing. Because humans are naturally chronic procrastinators.
We really are.
Even if you prepare perfectly and trigger the exact right emotional response, the default human reaction is always to say, this is great, I'll buy it tomorrow.
Always tomorrow.
Urgency is the specific psychological friction you introduce to force the decision today. You have to give them a tangible reason why waiting 24 hours costs them something.
And this psychology bleeds directly into how he handles negotiation, which he completely reframes. Like, he views negotiation purely as an ego game.
An ego game.
Yeah. The fundamental rule is managing the power shift. You have to meticulously make the other person feel like they are in control of the room and winning the interaction.
And his golden tactical rule for that, never state your price first.
Whatever. Let them anchor the numbers.
But how do you even get a high-level prospect to the negotiation table if you are, say, a 16-year-old kid with dish soap?
Well, Shamani's strategy relies heavily on providing highly targeted value up front. There's a brilliant anecdote in the sources where he attended this high-level business networking event.
Right, and he was completely ignored by all the senior executives because, well, he was just a kid.
But he noticed one particular executive looking totally exhausted and hungry. And instead of rushing up and aggressively pitching a business idea, Shamani simply offered to take him to get the best spicy peanut puree in the city.
Wait, treat food?
Yep, just took him to get a snack. And that tiny, deeply human act of solving an immediate problem instantly bypassed all the corporate defenses.
That makes total sense.
They built genuine trust over street food, and that specific encounter eventually led to Shamani landing a massive consulting project across Europe.
It just proves that managing the environment is way more important than memorizing some slick sales script. So negotiation isn't a tug of war where you dig your heels into the mud and try to physically drag the other person past your line.
No, not at all.
It's much more like a dance. You are lightly guiding them, letting them feel like they're leading the steps and dipping you, but you are the one who secretly walked over to the jukebox and picked the song.
That is a great way to look at it. So mastering human psychology gets you cash flow today. You move the soap, you land the consulting gig. But how do you scale that active cash flow into actual lasting wealth and a recognizable brand for tomorrow?
We have to shift from short-term survival tactics to long-term compounding strategy.
And that starts with a concept that honestly takes so much pressure off the builder. He calls it the 1% rule.
The 1% rule is highly liberating. It essentially states you do not need to be the absolute best in the world at what you do. You don't need to be the Steve Jobs of your industry.
Thank goodness.
Right. You simply need to be 1% better than the 99% of people immediately around you. And you monetize that tiny, accessible gap in knowledge or skill.
It totally removes the massive psychological barrier to entry. Because if you think you have to be the undisputed global master of a topic to teach it, you will literally never start.
Exactly.
Shamani used this exact principle to build 7 distinct income streams. He generates revenue through consulting, speaking engagements, online courses, book royalties, brand deals, running a digital agency, and affiliate marketing.
And what's crucial to understand here is that he didn't spend decades mastering 7 completely different industries.
No.
All 7 of those revenue streams stem from one single core expertise, which is social media communication. He just took his 1% advantage in that one specific skill and applied it across 7 different delivery mechanisms.
But when it comes to retaining and growing the wealth generated by those streams, his philosophy aligns with some pretty hard financial realities. If your income is entirely tied to your active waking hours, you are just highly paid labor. You aren't actually wealthy.
You have to make your money work while you are sleeping.
Right. So he advises taking 30% of your total income and diversifying it across a very specific portfolio architecture.
The breakdown in the sources outlines roughly 50% in solid blue-chip companies with proven management, 30% in high-growth startups, 10% in high-risk fun bets like cryptocurrency, and 10% in absolute certainties like physical gold or real estate.
And the reason for this specific 50-30-10-10 split is essential when you look at how he generates money. Income from personal branding, consulting, and digital agencies is inherently volatile.
Very up and down.
Yeah, you might have a massive month followed by a total drought. So this heavily weighted blue chip and real estate portfolio acts as a necessary, boring shock absorber for the erratic nature of freelance and entrepreneurial wealth.
But the engine that actually drives all of those opportunities, the consulting, the brand deals, the book sales, is his personal brand. And his definition of personal branding completely flips the conventional wisdom on its head.
It really does. Most people assume building a brand means packaging yourself.
Right. You polish your rough edges, put on a sleek corporate suit, hire a PR team, and project this flawless, untouchable image.
Shamani argues the exact opposite. He states that true personal branding is about unpackaging yourself.
Unpackaging?
Yeah. It is about deliberately revealing your raw habits, your daily operational struggles, and your authentic flaws. You want the audience to look at you and say, hey, he's just an average, somewhat messy guy like me. If he can figure this out, I can too.
This concept is perfectly validated by the critical book review we included from Abhijit Kumar.
Yeah, that review is quite blunt.
It is. Kumar explicitly rates that Shamani's book contains nothing new and merely reinforces business lessons taught by countless leaders before him.
But here's the fascinating part. Kumar immediately follows that criticism by admitting that the book is highly engaging, remarkably raw, and an honest account that pulls the reader in enough to finish it in a single sitting. Yeah. That highly critical review actually proves Shamani's exact point about execution over innovation. The underlying information isn't fundamentally unique, but the raw, unpackaged, highly authentic delivery is what makes valuable and sticky for the reader.
I hear that, but let's look at the reality of high-level B2B business. If you are totally unfiltered and you just unpackage all your messy flaws, your past failures, and your academic struggles on the internet, don't you risk looking wildly unprofessional?
It's a completely rational fear.
Like, if a Fortune 500 company is looking to hire a consultant, wouldn't they run away from the guy who admits he couldn't even write his own book?
You'd think so, but the data of the modern market suggests otherwise. We live in a landscape that is just saturated with perfectly curated AI-generated corporate speak. Every company website sounds exactly the same.
That's very true.
In that environment, relatable authenticity acts as a rare tag of trust.
A tag of trust.
Yeah, when a corporate client sees that you are completely transparent about your shortcomings, like admitting you used a ghostwriter because your grammar is terrible, they are infinitely more likely to believe you when you tell them what you are actually good at. That raw, verifiable trust commands a much higher premium than a polished but sterile facade.
If you admit the bad, they believe the good.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's pull all these blueprints and muddy realities together for you. If you want to integrate the build, don't talk philosophy into your own life, you have to accept that the traditional, simple printer educational systems are just not going to teach you how to apply knowledge.
No, you had to build that curriculum yourself.
And that requires admitting your true coordinates. Embrace the areas where you suck, actively sample the buffet of life, and stop letting your ego block your route.
You have to shed the paralyzing pressure to invent the next big global disruption. Copy the market validation, but out-execute the competition with your unique delivery and pricing.
And when it comes time to move that product, sell by triggering emotion and forcing urgency, and negotiate by letting the other person feel the power shift.
Scale your wealth by simply being 1% better than the room, and let your safe investments absorb the volatility of your hustle.
Most importantly, remember that building a lasting brand isn't about transforming into a flawless corporate avatar. It's about unapologetically unpackaging who you already are, flaws and all.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to consider as we wrap up this deep dive.
We've spent a lot of time dissecting how Shamani advocates for execution over unique innovation. This idea that you can build an empire just by copying a proven model and adding your own unpackaged spin.
It completely reframes what it takes to be successful.
Exactly. So think about the sheer amount of mental energy and anxiety you expend trying to come up with a completely original, never-before-seen idea. And ask yourself, what could you actually start building today, right now, if you simply gave yourself permission to stop innovating and just be a really excellent copycat? What if that exact raw, messy flaw you've been hiding is actually the greatest asset you possess if you just started building with it today?